Diocese has 570,000 Roman Catholic faithful here in the San Antonio area. So a large contingent of San Antonio is Catholic and is firmly behind the Pope as he arrives here on this Sunday morning. There are 35 individuals aside from the Holy Father on this plane, according to my count here, and they are represented by everybody from Vatican television cameramen to security agents to, obviously, the Pope's staff, Reverend Robert N. Lynch, who is the Associate General Secretary of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, who has been the computer wizard who has put all the logistics for this 10-day, 9-city trip through the United States. He has pieced it all together. He is supposed to be something of a genius when it comes to logistics.
And there are logistics involved in this trip, as in any trip the Pope takes. We read that when he first began traveling in 1979, staging these really spectacular visits, that the trips were, quite frankly, something of a mess. They were plagued by delays, problems. One spokesman for the Vatican said that if anything could go wrong, they went wrong. Well, in the past 9 years, that has been corrected. The Vatican has these trips now down to a fine art. Every detail of the Pope's visit is choreographed in each city that he visits, so you get an idea of the tremendous work involved in bringing the Pope to San Antonio. And the airplane says Trans-World, but that is Shepherd 1 right there at Kelly Air Force Base.
It's my understanding a little earlier in the morning another airplane landed, and on board that was the Pope-mobile, this Mercedes-Benz modified vehicle that he drives around in. It has armor-plated glass. He will be riding in that through all the different parades. However, as he departs from Kelly Air Force Base on the 11-mile trip to Westover Hills, which is the site of the Mass, he will be driving in a limousine. It's the only time during his visit that he will not be in the Pope-mobile when he is in transit here in San Antonio. The Pope-mobile, interestingly enough, there are two different units, both exactly identical, are being hopscotched across the country. The one, this is my understanding, and I don't know this for a fact, the one that we are getting comes from Columbia, South Carolina, and from here it will go on to Los Angeles, which is the stop after Phoenix.
And the Pope-mobile that was in New Orleans will be leapfrogged to Phoenix, which is his next stop. Now, the Pope, as we said, will be on several parades while he is in San Antonio. None of the parades are particularly long, but they will offer many, many San Antonians a chance to make history in their own lives by seeing Pope John Paul II. Here is the parade route from the Chancery to Municipal Auditorium. This is after the Mass and after the Pope has lunch with the Texas bishops. He will proceed through the Woodlawn Lake area, through the downtown area to Municipal Auditorium. And as Jesse Degollado told us earlier, he will be seeing many, many displays by parishes in the community. After he leaves Municipal Auditorium and is meeting with Catholic Charities, he goes to San Fernando Cathedral. That little parade is less than a mile, we understand, but it will go by the Alamo. What a moment that will be, to see a Pope in front of the cradle of Texas liberty. After his meeting with religious trainees at San Fernando Cathedral, the Pope will go to Guadalupe Plaza, into the heart of the barrio, San Antonio's west side, where he is eagerly awaited. And he will speak there in Spanish, his only speech to be delivered in Spanish, outside Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. So, a lot of parade routes, a lot of time in the Pope-mobile, a lot of opportunities for San Antonio to see John Paul II. And finally, the plane is rolling to a stop there. The greeting party is ready. The bands are ready. What a moment this is.
A little bit about the Pope, and obviously you will be hearing a lot about him in the next 10 hours of coverage here on KSAT. He is the first non-Italian Pope elected in 450 years since Adrian VI. He is the first Polish Pope ever, and he is the youngest Pope in a century. Back in the, I guess it was the 1840s, when Pope Pius VI, I believe it was elected Pope at the age of 50. Pope John Paul was 58 when he was elected Pope. Pope John Paul II is the most traveled Pope in the history of the papacy. He has traveled now to 60 some odd different countries. This is his 34th specific visit outside the Vatican. He's traveled 320,000 miles around the world. Just an incredible record.
And you know, Bob, that has been his stamp on the papacy. That has been his own personalization of the papacy, is to travel. He believes very firmly, the Vatican says, that he will take his message himself to the people who cannot come to him. It was something he decided to do, that he wanted to do. He knew there were many, many people in the world who would never be able to come to the Vatican, and it is a great expense for him to travel, but he says better that than the people coming all the way to Rome, which for many, many people is, of course, not a reality. So this is his own stamp he puts on the papacy. He is the most traveled pope, a pilgrim pope, he calls himself.
It's his own brand of evangelism, and it is a way of focusing attention on the church, and specifically the Catholic Church, quite obviously with the hours and hours of television coverage in anticipation of the papal trip, national coverage and local coverage. The trip has done just that. If he says nothing, it has done that. It has focused a lot of attention on the Catholic Church, its growth, its problems. And his trip here to San Antonio, more importantly, on a local basis, obviously, is that it says a lot to Hispanic Catholics, who traditionally, although a large contingent of the Catholic Church, have been more or less ignored by Rome.
And there is the greeting party making their way out onto the tarmac, preparing to greet John Paul II. It always takes a while once the jet lands to get the door off,
get the engine shut down.
All those things. There's Shepherd 1 right there under the cockpit window.
Special monogram on the TWA 727 there. Interestingly, a bit of papal trivia. He is the first reigning pope to ski. Unfortunately, he is also the first reigning pope to be shot back on May 13th of 1981.
Part of his entourage now getting off the airplane. We don't know if these are security. I would assume that some of them are security. I see a gentleman holding a bag. That could be the Pope's personal doctor, who travels with him, of course. But the first few people to come off, they say hello, shake hands with the dignitaries on hand, and we wait for Pope John Paul to fill the doorway of Shepherd 1.
Father Sullivan, are you familiar enough with the papal entourage that as you see them, you can identify them, or is that unfair of me to ask you that?
I'm sorry, Bob, but I don't think I could identify the people coming from Rome, with the exception of some of the cardinals, like Cardinal William Baum and Cardinal Casseroli. I don't think I could recognize, at least on the TV screen.
There he is, Pope John Paul II. Oh my goodness, we have seen it so many times, so many other cities, so many other parts of the world, and he is in San Antonio.
But we've never seen it or heard it with mariachi music before.
A special touch from San Antonio to Pope John Paul II. Let's just listen for a moment. Does he look tired?
Bring it up. You got it?
Wife Mary Alice saying hello to the Archbishop, rather to Pope John Paul II, after whom they named their newborn baby son, John Paul Anthony Cisneros. After the mayor and his wife greet the Pope are the county judge, Tom Vickers, and his wife. By the way, this order is dictated by protocol. It's not a manner of showing favorites or anything like that, but the Vatican is very, very careful not to step on any toes, and they have a very strict guideline of who the Pope greets and in what order.
According to his schedule, the pontiff will be on the ground here at Kelly Air Force Base only a matter of 10 minutes, and you can see there in the foreground the limousines that are standing by. They will whisk him off to Westover Hills, where he will make a quick drive through the crowd there at the Papal Mass site, and then go into the back in a vesting area, the sacristy, which is actually set up in a couple of mobile homes, put on his papal vestments, and by 11 o'clock, because he is running on schedule right now, the Papal Mass should begin.
Father Sullivan, what are some of the thoughts you're having right at this moment, seeing the leader of the church in San Antonio on a very familiar setting with a familiar backdrop?
Well, certainly it's an historic day, and we're all pleased to have the Holy Father in our city. He pays great homage to the Hispanic people as well as to all the people of San Antonio by putting us on his itinerary. Of course, Archbishop Flores had asked the Holy Father some years ago to come to visit and see this wonderful city of which we're a part. One thing I noticed, the black Monsignor Emery Kabongo, yesterday in New Orleans when the Holy Father was introduced to the black Catholics, he was asked if he could be at home with the black Catholics. And he pointed to Monsignor Kabongo and said, "I live with a black Catholic." Because Monsignor is his personal secretary.
What a sense of humor. You know, he exhibits a sense of humor, and that is part of the charm that has captivated people around the world. What a moment for the mariachis and some of the workers out at Kelly Air Force Base. The Pope, as he is known to do, has kind of broken away from his official route straight to his limousine and is shaking hands, mingling with the people. An unexpected moment, and you know that they are absolutely thrilled.
Dominating the picture here over to your right is a Secret Service man, and take this opportunity to point out the fact that the Secret Service travels with the Pope because he is considered a head of state. As the head of the Catholic Church, he runs the Vatican, which is its own nation. Small as it is, it has considerable moral influence as well as political. And as such, the Secret Service is providing security. Nationwide, it is going to cost $5.7 million for the federal government to supply security to the Pope. The Pope also travels with his Swiss guards as well.
And Vatican security, too, I understand. Getting into the vehicles now, beginning to make their way out to Westover Hills, where so many thousands of people are anxiously awaiting. He flew over the Mass site just moments ago, and now he is on the ground and headed out there with Secret Servicemen at each corner of the vehicle. The yellow and white flag of the Vatican, the symbol of the papacy flying, along with, is that the United States flag on the right front fender?
I'm unable to see it at this point.
Well, there are two flags, and we would assume that the other is that of the U.S. But that yellow and white flag has become so familiar now, and we'll be seeing a lot more of those, especially along the parade route.
Pope John Paul is, interestingly, probably the first Catholic Pope to be of any athletic endeavor. He skis, as I indicated a few minutes ago. I think it wasn't but a couple of years ago that he did some mountain climbing as well, something that he used to do quite a bit as a younger man. He was ordained as a priest in 1946 at the age of 26. During World War II, he worked in a chemical plant. He worked in a stone quarry as well, and it was with a couple of very close brushes with death in a bus accident and a truck accident that I think he came to grips with his mortality and gained a great respect for religion. Of course, he was always raised in the Catholic Church, terribly devoted to Our Lady of Czestochowa, the Black Madonna, the patroness of Poland. His father raised him devoutly Catholic, but it wasn't until later on in life, actually during World War II, that he decided to take up the priesthood. And shortly after the war ended, he became a priest, and then his rise within the Catholic Church was meteoric. By the age of 38, he was an auxiliary bishop. By the age of 44, he was an archbishop of Krakow. By the time the communist government finally relented and allowed an archbishop to be seated there in that city. By 47, Pope Paul VI appointed him a cardinal. And then at the age of 57, as we said, one of the youngest popes ever in all of Catholicism, he was elected pope, October 16, 1978.
Something else interesting about him, Bob, is you mentioned that he'd worked as a stone cutter in a quarry when he was younger. He is the first pope of modern time not to come from the aristocracy, to come from the working class. He also holds two doctorates, one in ethics The other escapes me at the moment.
Theology.
Theology, of course. So he is highly educated. He is a prolific writer. Over 300 books, poems, articles of every sort imaginable credited to him.
And a play that quite currently is being made into a movie starring Burt Lancaster called The Jeweler's Shop.
That's right.
Which is about 3 different couples and their evolution through time.
The Pope is leaving Kelly Air Force Base. As you can see, the motorcade making its way. People beginning to disperse now. We see a lot of media types heading for their vehicles. They will be following the Pope. Shepherd 1 will stay at Kelly Air Force Base until the Pope departs.
It's our understanding that Shepherd 1 is parked in the same place that Air Force 1 parks when the President comes to town, the same place that it parks when the Vice President comes to town, and when the space shuttle being ferried on a 747 comes through town, it often stops in this same spot before it's put away in its tie-down area, which is another area on the tarmac over there at Kelly Air Force Base. So this particular area at Kelly sees some traffic with VIPs, and I think the Pope would constitute a VIP.
Kelly has certainly played host to many significant moments in San Antonio. Really a wonderful sight now out at Westover Hills in northwest San Antonio. A very large crowd. We get so many different estimates on the crowd size. It will be interesting when this is all over to hear what Catholic officials estimate, what the police estimate, what people who were there estimate. But we can see many, many thousands of people gathered. The Pope is on the way. We don't know if they know that the Pope is on the way, but nevertheless, they know the time is drawing near, so they must be excited. And Father Sullivan, we turn to you once again. What are on the minds of the people who are anticipating celebrating Mass with the Pope? What does that mean to a Catholic, for those of us who are non-Catholic, to be sharing Mass with the Pope?
Well, I think, first of all, Deborah, the people out there right now want to be as close to the Holy Father as possible. And they'll be looking to be as close as he drives through the crowds. That's first and foremost. Secondly, it is a great occasion for the faithful to gather with their spiritual leader to celebrate the Eucharist, which is the primary and unifying act of worship of the Catholic Church.
Is it a personal connection? Is it more personal now for the people of San Antonio, the Catholics, to have the Pope in San Antonio celebrating Mass with them? Does that give them a closer connection to the Church and to him?
Well, certainly I think that would be the case. It's wonderful to be able to see these events on television, but there's nothing like being present. I was in St. Peter's Square in 1978 when Pope John Paul II was elected. And it was electrifying to be with the crowd as he came out on the balcony and greeted the crowds for the first time.
So you were there with him at the beginning. You must have a terrific connection with him.
I just happened to be in Rome on business as I was living in Switzerland at the time, and it was just a marvelous experience.
Thank you so much. We'll be coming back to you right now. We're going to turn to Hollis Grizzard and Lisa Rudolph, who have been at the Mass site overnight, are there now, and have an update for us on what is happening there. Hollis and Lisa?
Bob and Deborah, the crowd is standing right now. They had been singing, and the excitement is building incredibly quickly here. It is as if they all know he will be here in just a few minutes, the moment they have been waiting for. Now, at last word, the crowd estimate, the number of pilgrims and faithful gathered here was about over 150,000. And continuing to grow, although we do not have any indication at this point whether they are coming in as rapidly as they had been all morning.
One official did indicate to us he doesn't think the crowd is going to grow much beyond 200,000, and that is quite a bit below the original estimate we had heard of perhaps 500,000 people here. You can see behind us that many of the grids or squares here at the Papal Mass site don't have any people in them. Earlier today, when most of the people came in that were here very early this morning, they moved up to the front, of course, but now many of these people have moved back towards us, towards the media area, and they have lined the road here, the paved road, where the Pope Mobile will actually zigzag its way through the Mass site here before arriving down near the altar. Now, our Mary Walker has been with many of the worshipers this morning. She is standing by right now along the papal route. Mary?
Well,
Hollis, it is an absolutely incredible feeling down here. The feeling of mounting tension, the feeling of what these people have been waiting for months and months. Now, as you can see behind me, as you said earlier, the people have lined what will be the papal mass side parade route. These people have their songbooks out. They have some words prepared to actually talk to him, but right now they're indicating that they are just terribly excited. We have told some of them that the plane has landed, and that has just increased the feeling that has already been down here. Now, we also noticed that security down here has tightened intensely. We've got the mounted patrol from the Sheriff's Department, a row of horses that have just lined this parade route with sheriff's deputies on top of them, just anticipating the arrival as well. That is the situation right now. We will keep you updated, and of course, as soon as we will come back. Hollis?
You know what is surprising, Mary, is that they're really not, the crowd is not that deep along the papal route. Many people, it seems, have decided to just stay in their seats, and they don't want to relinquish their seats. They want to make sure that they have a good place for which they can celebrate the Mass with the Pope. There are people along the route, but again, the majority of the faithful have stayed in their places in front of the altar. Now, as Father James Sullivan said earlier, it does seem as if the faithful want to be as close to the Pope as possible. Perhaps that is why they opted to stay closer to the altar. That is where the worship and the spiritual beauty of this morning will be taking place. Now, real briefly, what is going to happen when the Pope arrives at this site? As Hollis mentioned earlier, there will be the first of many papal parades this morning. He's expected to arrive here about 10:25, and it will take about 20 minutes for the Pope Mobile to wind its way down to the altar. From there, the Pope will go into one of two mobile homes that have been set up as sacristies, and he will don papal vestments, chasuble, an aqua and white silk chasuble that was created by Houston designers and Houston weavers, and on it, it has the symbols of Texas, deep dark green for the color of the Texas earth, and the light blue bands represent the rivers of Texas, as well as the colors of the Virgin Mary. Now, from there, the 500-voice interdiocesan choir will sing, Gather Us In, and then the papal procession begins up to the altar, and that is when the Mass will begin roughly at about 11 o'clock. Bob and Deborah?
Thank you, Lisa. It's interesting that the trip to San Antonio was really sponsored by, if you can use that word, the 14 dioceses of Texas, which, Father, correct me if I'm wrong, is a relatively unique situation. Normally, one diocese will take care of the organization and put the trip together in terms of all of the logistics. Back in 1983, all of the dioceses of this particular province here in Texas got together and made a request to the Vatican that the Pope come to Texas. And then they set about the business of executing it and putting it all together. Quite an undertaking, wasn't it?
It certainly has been, and having been at a few meetings where we were briefed on the preparations, I'm just in awe as to how all this has been accomplished or will be accomplished today.
Why was the trip actually placed here in San Antonio?
When so many other cities were involved in Texas.
Well, San Antonio is the provincial see. As the archdiocese, it is the only archdiocese in the state. Recognition of its historic importance, but also of the great number of Catholics who live in the city. And while Galveston, Houston was the first diocese in Texas, San Antonio gained more prominence through the years. And
this is the motorcade as it makes its way, by the way, to Westover Hills. Sorry to interrupt you there, Father, but I thought since we had this live transmission from Sky 12, I would indicate what it is.
It's hard to tell exactly where he is.
I think that is probably Highway 90, but I may be wrong about that. Is Paul Venema up there, and can he speak in Sky 12?
No, he cannot.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
So it's left up to us to guess, but we know he is on his way, he is proceeding to the Mass site. Father Sullivan, go ahead and continue about the fact that Galveston, Houston area was originally the first
diocese in Texas. But San Antonio, by reason of its size and the number of Catholics, gained greater prominence through the years, and The first cathedral was established here in San Antonio. I think the bishops of Texas wanted this to be an event for all the people of Texas and not just for the people of San Antonio. This is the see of the Archbishop. We still wanted everyone to feel included and to feel welcome. As you well know, some of the Catholics in West Texas will probably be going to Phoenix because that's closer to their own home. But this is an event for all of Texas.
Were the missions here in San Antonio a motivation for locating the event in San Antonio? And the fact that the first Mass was performed here in San Antonio honoring St. Anthony of Padua back in 1691, I think it was?
Well, I certainly think that that's one of the reasons that San Antonio gained such prominence, because it was such an early seat of Catholicism as the first Franciscan missionaries came here. You probably are well aware that the missions here are older than the missions in California, and it certainly is a place where the faith had its roots.
Great history. You mentioned that all the dioceses were involved and that this was indeed a Texas visit. One thing we know is that parishes from around the state had a hand in the liturgy, that they submitted ideas, suggestions, thoughts that would be included in the words and prayers spoken today at the Mass. And of course the cost, as has been mentioned, has been footed by the various dioceses. How has fundraising gone? Do you know where the church is in raising the money?
For the most part, I think it's gone very well. The Archbishop at a recent meeting mentioned that the total cost would be, as spread out over Texas Catholics, would only amount to about 68 cents per person. Now, not every person is going to give his or her 68 cents, but we hope that through corporate contributions and church contributions and contributions on part of the clergy that any deficit will be made up.
And we are seeing again the Mass site where pre-Mass celebrations are underway, many choirs from around the state participating, really entertaining the crowd, sharing with the crowd, preparing for what is ahead. What apparently the pictures we saw is only minutes away because the Pope's motorcade is on the way to the Mass.
I think they did a beautiful job of recovering from that terrible setback on Thursday when the storm blew the 150-foot towers over. I think the altar, 15-foot elevation, 3 different tiers there, 40-foot by 45-foot by 45-foot, it's just awe-inspiring. And here's a guy who never has traffic problems even in rush hour. They closed off the expressway for the Pope.
Those are the police officers riding in advance of the motorcade.
Some 2,200 various law enforcement officers are going to be working this weekend. A little bit of trouble with the transmission from Sky 12. 800 of them alone, of these officers, to do traffic control. We have some wire service from the Associated Press that indicates the San Antonio Archdiocese officials have now downscaled their estimate of the final crowd from 500,000 to 300,000 as visitors from the border and elsewhere were slow to arrive today for the Mass. Irene Hernandez of San Antonio served a taco breakfast to the 12 family members and friends who arrived at the Mass site gates at 3 a.m.
3 a.m.
Yes, those were the first to come through today.
Father, we're looking at the altar. We were just a moment ago. This is what has been salvaged, and this was very last minute. You were a part of all that was going on, the planning. What went through your mind when that terrible sight?
Here it is on the screen.
Just total disbelief. I happened to be watching television at the time when a bulletin came over the airwaves, and when they finally got pictures at the site, it was just incredible. I felt so bad for Father David Garcia and Father Larry Steuben, Sister Charlene Wheelick, all those who had been so intimately involved in the planning.
David Garcia, Father Garcia joked that, well, we'll just have to show the Holy Father some pictures. Will someone show him photographs?
Oh, I'm sure they will. They were very proud of this beautiful construction, and they were just putting the finishing touches on it when we had this disastrous happening. But fortunately, it was not a catastrophe in terms of human life or injury.
Certainly. Someone, another minister in the community, a non-Catholic, said, I thought very well, that it was a great disappointment, but it was almost symbolic of the many storms that the church has weathered. And the beauty of what we've seen today is certainly evidence that the Mass site has weathered the storm. The Mass is going on. I don't think it's lessened anyone's anticipation or excitement about celebrating Mass.
Well, people down through the centuries, even the poor, have constructed beautiful churches to enhance their worship. But the church itself isn't important, the church building. It's the people. The people are the church. And as they gather today out there in Westover Hills, they are the church. And the setting is simple, aesthetically lovely, not as grandiose as it might have been.
The Pope comes to these various localities, 9 cities in this particular trip, and he speaks to the people in those communities. What is he going to say to San Antonians and Texans today, in particular about their lives, their spirituality, and the future of those people in the Catholic Church?
Well, Bob, the scriptures that will be proclaimed at the liturgy today are the universal scriptures, those that will be proclaimed in Eucharist throughout the world today. In fact, they're the same ones that the Holy Father used in the liturgy last evening in New Orleans. But the theme today will be unity in the work of service, building up the body of Christ, reconciliation. And I think the Holy Father will acknowledge how the multicultural society here in San Antonio and South Texas has pulled together and has created harmonious living, and at the same time recognize the divergencies and the challenges that still remain, and call people to greater effort to receive the poor and the oppressed and those who don't have a share in the goods of this country.
That is a common theme of John Paul II's, but it is specific to San Antonio. He has chosen this setting to reiterate some of that. At least we believe that those are some of the things he's going to touch on. We're going to go out to Lisa Rudolph and Hollis Grizzard once again. They are at the Mass site. We've been looking at pictures, but when we turn to them, we are able to get a little more updated information, a little more feel for what is happening. Hollis, Lisa?
Bob and Deborah, we were noticing the pictures from Sky 12 there a little earlier, too, trying to guess exactly where along the route from Kelly Air Force Base to the Mass site the Pope was, his motorcade. We can, it's kind of difficult to tell from that. It looks like it might be Highway 151, which would put him fairly close to the Mass site. Now, if I'm correct, Bob and Deborah, he is supposed to change into the Pope Mobile just outside the bounds of the Mass site and then enter here. Earlier, you had asked, Deborah, you were wondering when the Pontiff touched down at Kelly Air Force Base if the worshipers here at the Mass site were aware of that. The communications are evidently very good, because it was only a matter of 3 or 4 seconds after you asked that question that the announcement was made that Pope John Paul II had landed in San Antonio. Since that time, however, there has been no other announcement here at the Mass site.
Actually, the pre-Mass celebration, it continues. There's been more prayer and more singing, and the people along the papal route just seem to be on hold. They're standing there, they're waiting, obviously very anxiously for the moment that they have been waiting for all morning, the chance to see a glimpse of the Pope, and they know it's going to be a brief glimpse.
It appears now that they're approaching or have just crossed Potranco Road there, so he should be just a matter of minutes away from the Mass site.
Now let's go down to Mary Walker, who is along the papal route with some of the faithful waiting to see Pope John Paul II for the first time in person.
Well, Lisa, we have moved in a little more closely to some of the people along the parade route so that we could just talk to a few of them. I want to interrupt you for just a minute here. Why are you lined up here? What's the importance of this?
Why? To view the Pope, to show the love, respect that we have for him, for the peace throughout the world.
You were telling me earlier that you were just about too excited
Too
to
excited.
talk.
Too excited. I'm overwhelmed.
What about when he passes by?
I'll probably close my eyes with excitement.
Now, what about you, ma'am? You've been out here close by waiting as well. What are you feeling right now, waiting for the Pope here?
Oh, I feel very happy to see him coming to see us.
Is it worth risking your seats down there to be here?
Yes, ma'am, it's worth.
Okay. Okay, again, we have thousands and thousands of people here who are lined up along this parade route waiting to see the Pope. And, of course, we will come back as soon as the Pope does arrive here at the Papal Mass site. Back to you, Hollis.
Thank you, Mary. One of the police helicopters that has been following the Pope's motorcade is now over the Mass site, so we can assume that he's just within a few minutes of arriving here. When he does enter the Mass site, he will come in almost directly in front of us. You can hear the helicopter going over now. He'll come in almost directly in front of us. We'll have an excellent view when the Pope Mobile does enter the Mass site here.
Hollis, what was the reaction of the crowd when they made the announcement that John Paul had landed?
There was an enthusiastic and strong and warm applause. It was as if they too had realized, as you were saying, Deborah, it is a historic moment for San Antonio. Of course, now, history, much more of an impression on them when Pope John Paul II does arrive here.
Exactly. It is almost as if it really hasn't hit people out here. They know he's coming. They know it's going to be a matter of minutes. But until they actually see him, you know, they're just waiting breathlessly.
Right now we are seeing pictures of the patrol officers on their motorcycles who have been at the head of the motorcade, patrol cars with their lights flashing, other vehicles carrying the entourage, and the vehicle itself with the Vatican flag and the United States flag. That is the car the Pope is riding in. They are pulling into the Mass site right now.
They've made the announcement now. The Pope has arrived on the Mass site, they've said, and there's a clapping throughout the crowd, and people are running, moving very quickly along the route to try and get a glimpse of the Pope.
Somewhere along the line now, the Pope will emerge from the limousine and climb into the Pope Mobile and take a tour of the grounds there, driving in a prearranged parade area. And many people there at the Mass site have lined that parade area so they can get a better look at the Pope before he gets back and vests in the sacristy in final preparation for the Mass, which is scheduled to begin now in 25 minutes.
Lisa and Hollis, are the crowd being instructed to remain where they are? Are they taking any precautions to avoid any type of overexcitement there?
At this point, they've just made an announcement asking people to please cooperate with security personnel, but all morning long, Bob and Deborah, things have been running so smoothly, and the group of pilgrims has just been so cooperative, and really they've been saying there have been no major problems out here tonight. Basically, people are pretty much standing in their spots, and there's not much precautions that, other than what they've already taken, that is needed. There is a significant security force that does line the entire route through the Mass site here, and so far everyone seems to be abiding by their instructions, and although there's a real feeling and enthusiasm and a warmth and an urgency, there is not anything that would, any disruptions of any kind, and I don't think that you'll see it when the Pope enters the Mass site.
We'll mention once again, as you all have, that the Pope is going to a mobile home where he and the other concelebrants will change into their vestments for the Mass. Interesting story about the mobile home builder. He was asked by Father David Garcia, one of the organizers of the Mass, if he would donate the mobile homes for the day. And Gary Lundvall of Burleson said he would not pass up an opportunity to be a part of history. He has donated and constructed the mobile homes there at the site. He's going to reclaim them, and yes, he is a businessman. He is going to offer them for sale. He says he's going to put a plaque in each home to commemorate the historic date, and he says that he is certain that the mobile home will be very special to someone after Pope John Paul has used it.
Yeah, one of the things he also said, Deborah, was that the Pope will, as tradition, whenever he enters into a building, will bless the mobile home. And that should be a big selling point, he said.
There is the Pope in the Pope Mobile, making his way through the crowd.
You can hear the applause. They've already started. Some people are screaming.
Archbishop Petros in the Pope Mobile with Pope John Paul. A position he will maintain for the entire day, as he is the chief host of the papal visit.
Oh, and you can see the yellow hat. What a greeting from San Antonio to Pope John Paul II.
I got the opportunity in my trip to Italy to go to Civitavecchia, which is a small town about 40 miles from Rome, at a time of the papal visit. And when he drove by in the Pope Mobile and I was maybe 6 or 8 feet away from him, the feeling is just awe-inspiring. The man has such charisma and magnetism, obviously a combination of his office, but also his personality.
What a moment for San Antonio as they give him a Texas-sized welcome in Northwest San Antonio, Westover Hills. And what a day for Archbishop Patrick Flores.
He has so been looking forward to this over the last year. As he said when I talked to him last March, this will be the best ever. With such enthusiasm, he said it. The preparations out at the Mass site, obviously in terms of constructing the huge altar out there, have been going on for the better part of 2 or even 3 months now. And then, of course, there is all the logistics involved with actually putting the Mass on. There are possibly as many as 200,000 people, faithful, who have gathered for the Mass, but there are a lot of people who are also taking part in the Mass itself. 1,500 lay Eucharistic ministers who will be serving the communion when the time comes for that, 600 concelebrating priests, 500 choir members, 100 people selected to receive communion from the Pope himself, 4,400 ushers, 160-member welcoming committee in costumes representing 26 different ethnic groups. There'll be 10,000 people in what is called the green zone, or the buffer area. It's a VIP area set up for those who have worked extremely hard to put this Mass together, or relatives of priests or nuns, or entertainers who had some part in the pre-Mass program. And then 50 bishops, 24 of whom are active or retired bishops from Texas.
The Pope Mobile seems to be picking up a little speed at this point, but the crowd is definitely getting an eyeful of John Paul. We've noticed in the crowd, along with the flags that represent the Vatican, the yellow and white flags you see being waved there, we've seen flags from Mexico. So a number of people have made the trip up to see Pope John Paul II, and they are making their presence known with the Mexican flag, waving it at him and greeting him as well as Texans.
That AP copy I alluded to a little earlier as I continued reading it indicated that in Laredo, the Border Patrol there estimates only 4,000 Mexicans had entered the country.
Okay, turning the corner now. This is the last leg of John Paul's tour through the Mass site on the Pope Mobile. We can hear the band playing a welcome song for him. The choir singing a welcome to the Pope. And there it is from Sky 12. You hear the expression sea of humanity probably all too often, but for once this really is it. Let's see the Pope again. Secret Service never far away.
Who could have imagined last March when I drove by that 144-acre field out there in Westover Hills, as barren as it was, with piles of burning tree stumps that had just been cleared and ground that had just been worked up with a tractor pulling a disker, that we would see this scene months later, September 13th, 1987. Pope John Paul II in San Antonio.
You know, Bob and Deborah, as we listen to this beautiful mariachi music, you can't help but think about how important throughout this whole thing, when they were designing this altar, the effort to mix both the religious and traditional church and religious icons with the fiestas and culture of the Hispanics that are, of course, so important to our San Antonio. And looking out across this colorful, colorful sea of pilgrims and seeing the altar in the background as they've managed to mix the fiesta colors, as I said, again, it's really an incredible sight.
And we can see some people along the parade route who obviously believe once is not enough. They are running to try and get another look at John Paul II.
Especially the children who have the energy at this point.
And the photographers.
There he is. He's just within a few hundred feet of us, turning the corner. People waving their hats and clapping and almost reaching out even though they know he's in the bulletproof Pope-mobile. Just being close, and they're waving the yellow and white flags, Vatican flags. And now as he passes by, they're all sort of heading down to their seats, back to in anticipation of celebrating the Mass.
Lisa, you indicated a few moments ago that a number of people would not relinquish their seats to line this parade route. As the Pope came onto the grounds, did some of them decide to run over there after all and get a glimpse of him?
Yes, and now they're running back.
You know, Bob,
tides of the sea of humanity.
Bob and Deborah, now that many of the people along the parade route are moving back toward the altar, I would have to revise my very unofficial estimate upwards over 200,000 now. Would you agree, Lisa?
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. And you can see all the people behind us moving in haste to get back to where they had left their belongings so that they won't miss any of the papal procession, which should be beginning, if everything goes on schedule, in about 15 minutes.
Are we on schedule, Bob and Deborah?
So far, we appear to be on schedule. You know, an interesting item that came across our desk was that the Pope is believed to be the person in the world who has been seen by more people than anyone ever in history. And now San Antonians, thousands out there, can claim themselves a part of that group who have seen the Pope. There have been some gatherings for the Pope in the past year where they have had over 1 million people. And in 1979, he set the record for a gathering in the United States by attracting 1 million people. I believe it was in Chicago when he visited the United States for the first time as Pope. There was Hollis and Lisa from their vantage point watching the Pope, having to look at the screen actually to see him because he's now past their area.
How many of the folks there at the Mass actually get to see the Pope in this parade? Does he cover quite a number of the grids there, Hollis?
I'm sorry, Bob. Somebody else was talking. I couldn't understand your question.
I was just wondering how complete his circuit is through the Mass area. How many of the faithful will actually get to see him as he continues his way through the crowd at this point?
I think you're asking me how many people were actually able to line the parade route to get close to the Pope. Is that what you're asking?
That's close enough. Go ahead.
It's hard to hear out here with the music.
If that was your question, I'll answer that question because it is very difficult to hear. There's an excellent public address and sound system out here. I would guess that perhaps, 50,000 or maybe a little less actually left their seating grids and came along the wide route that brought it to the very back of the papal Mass site just so they could be very close to him. So a large percentage of the people here.
The map that we have seen of the Mass site indicates that the path the Pope has taken does cover quite a bit of ground. They expanded it actually several weeks ago so that he could cover more ground. There is the crowd. It appears that the Pope has now departed to his mobile home where he will don his vestments for the Mass. He has said his initial hello, and the crowd is settling back now, preparing for worship.
Lisa, one time earlier in the week, I read that the Pope will make a similar kind of circuit through the crowd after the Mass. Is that correct?
At this point, I do not think that is going to happen. Our last word was that he is going to quickly leave from the Mass and head over to Assumption Seminary to have lunch with the Texas bishops. And as far as I know, I don't believe he's going to have another tour of the site with the Pope-mobile.
I haven't heard that either, Bob, but maybe you have newer information.
Father Sullivan, let's turn to you now as we continue to look at the Mass site and the people going back to their seats after watching the Pope parade in the Pope-mobile. What is going to happen next? What will we see start to happen now as they prepare the crowd for the worship?
Well, there will be an introduction by Henry Guerra welcoming the people there, and then the actual liturgy will begin. There will be a gathering rite with a procession and much singing until the Pope arrives at his chair behind the altar.
Now, the theme of the Mass is reconciliation. How is that derived? How is it determined that that would be the theme today?
Well, the theme actually flows from the scriptural readings that will be proclaimed in the liturgy. The gospel is that of the unforgiving servant, one who has been forgiven much but refuses to forgive his fellow servant. And the first reading comes from Sirach, which is one of the deuterocanonical books, or in the Protestant church they consider them to be apocryphal books. And that is also about persons needing to forgive their brothers and sisters.
What are you hoping, and what are other Catholics hoping, the Pope will say in his homily? What issues would you like to see addressed?
Well, I would like to see him address the openness to peoples coming from other countries, and something that is quite politically and socially contentious in this area, but something that we have to continue to dialogue about. I do believe that the Pope is going to make a strong plea for Catholics to return to the sacrament of reconciliation, and I think that will be one of the focal points of his address.
Have they abandoned it?
Well, I wouldn't say, Bob, that they've abandoned it, but after Vatican II, with the emphasis on the Eucharist, many Catholics have found that participation in the Eucharist is one of the primary ways that we come together and ask forgiveness. However, the Church's teaching is that in cases of mortal sin, very serious sin, that Catholics must approach the sacrament of reconciliation, approach the priest and confess their sins, acknowledge their sinfulness, and receive absolution.
And the place that happens is in the confessional.
That's right.
As we continue to look at pictures, live pictures from the Mass site, we see the choir singing, and we have a very good shot there of the altar site. Ah, yes, El Paso, one of the dioceses of Texas. The banners that you see behind the altar are the banners that were salvaged from that terrible accident Friday. The banners represent the people of Texas, the Catholics of Texas, and their various dioceses. You will see all 14 of them up there. The issue of welcoming people to this country is of particular interest to Catholic people, as you indicated, Father. The sanctuary movement is, in large part, a work of the Catholic people. Does this put you in a bind as Catholics? You have a legal law, but do you also have a moral obligation?
Well, that is the question, Deborah. I would like to say that it's not just the work of Catholics, as you've read and seen, that many churches, faith communities have joined in this effort to give refuge and sanctuary to people who are political refugees and even sometimes economic refugees. And that's where the quarrel continues in our political system. Should we be welcoming the economic refugees as well as the political refugees, and how do you distinguish sometimes between the two?
If John Paul should challenge Catholics to be more active, or to take a role in the sanctuary movement, or to welcome, is the way he might put it, the people from other countries who come here for refuge, is the words of John Paul, are the words from John Paul enough, do you think, to get people who have not participated or who have a reluctance to participate to become active?
Well, I don't think he will, in any sense, publicly endorse the sanctuary movement. He's not going to say anything to Catholics that is against the law of their own country. But he's going to ask them to be welcoming in spirit and to work to bring justice to this cause.
I guess my point that I did not make so well was that I'm wondering what the impact of the Pontiff's words are. When he says something, how it is received, how much weight it carries, so to speak.
Well, I think it will be more of an invitation. It's not going to be any kind of a command. But he's going to ask us to look more closely at the gospel message and the gospel values and to try to incorporate them in our lives. And I think the more that John Paul offers invitation to the Catholic people, the more likely they are to respond, especially American Catholics. We are not used to being told what to do and in a democratic society. And when he becomes very commanding, that's when American Catholics tend to resist his voice. But I think if it's couched in invitation, the people are going to sit up and take notice. And
if
listen.
he asks the faithful to look within themselves, then.
That's right, and what the gospel is saying to them.
Father Sullivan, thank you. We'll be coming to you again as we continue to look at the Mass site. Bob, we've got some more information about some of the instruments that will be used in the service.
Very quickly, I wanted to make mention of the fact that we saw some sisters there on
Are
the
those
screen.
the cloistered nuns?
I don't know. I'm not well enough schooled in the vestments that they wear, but it's interesting. The Carmelite sisters, a cloistered convent of nuns, their convent is up on Bandera Road. They never leave the convent. They spend all of their time there in prayer. And this is the first time, it's my understanding, since the convent was actually built on that particular location, that the nuns have been outside the convent. Was that in 1983? Those are the Carmelite nuns?
These are the Carmelite nuns. What a moment then for them also to be...
And this occasion was so important, obviously, that they have come outside the convent into public.
Those who are cloistered may be permitted by the Pope himself, or in some cases a bishop, to come out of the cloister for a special occasion.
Thank you, Father. Well, at this point, the Pope is putting on the vestments that will be used during the celebration of the Mass. During that Mass, the Pontiff will use a communion piece made by a jeweler right here in the Southwest. James Avery started designing these various items in his Kerrville garage, and as Kathy Teague reports, he's come a long way since then.
They've been working since early summer, grinding, filing, and shaping pieces of history. Here in the Hill Country studios of James Avery Craftsman, designers are working on 5 communion pieces to be used by Pope John Paul II during his Mass in San Antonio.
It's historical, first of all, and I hope the cup is balanced, it feels good in his hand.
The San Antonio Archdiocese wants the work to reflect Texas in the Southwest. So Avery and his artists selected limestone from the Guadalupe River. Designers say the ancient basket weave pattern being carved in the stone may be traditional, but it is intended to send out a special message.
It has no end or no beginning, and that symbolizes God. It also could symbolize the 4 corners of the earth and the 4 evangelists.
Brass prototypes are now being used to fit